Meatbag by Ash Crowlin. The road was paradise, and paradise was paved with the souls of the weak. Jimmy Tyler knew this intrinsically from a young age, and he lived his life by the maxim, do unto the small. Tough attitude, sure, but there's no fairness to be had in life either way, so he had no regrets about it. And in his 12 years as head of operations at Militech, a few sob stories had never taken a single cent from his bank account. Now, Jimmy had done some sick things in his time. When he'd found out his hot piece of ass secretary was knocked up and planned to leave the company and become a stay-at-home mom, he paid her 10 grand under the table to get a back alley abortion from a trusty source of his. Yeah, she'd cried about it, and sure, he supposed it was an unfair offer to make. But that didn't stop her from taking the fistfuls of hundreds. Nor did it stop her from sucking on old Jimmy's 10-incher and swallowing the payload out of pure gratitude. She knew Jimmy Tyler's world, and the rules a good citizen of that world plays by, and all's well that ends well. Another time, when he had been completely shit-faced after an all-night bender, he'd come across an old man panhandling outside of an all-night convenience store. The man had looked broken down by life. He was hunched over on a cane, and below his Vietnam veteran's hat, his eyes looked like a man who spent his entire life running from something terrible. All fear and tears. So, being the good-natured man Jimmy was, he went into the store and broke $200 bills into smaller change. He'd fanned them out from the man so that he could see the multiple 10s and 20s, and he held them below the man's nose so that he could smell them too. He told the man he could keep every single bill that he gulped down, no chewing. And damn it if the man didn't try to gulp every single one of them, bill after bill. When he puked up the first 5 bills, Jimmy told him there was another 100 in it for him if he ate the vomit. Yep, that was sure one hell of an entertaining evening for old Jimmy. But what he had in store for the man in the trunk was something truly horrendous. Something that made him feel a little sick just to conceive. The man kicked at the trunk lid again, trying futilely to escape. It made Jimmy smile. He'd purposely tied the ropes loosely. There was more fun to be had when the stakes seemed even if he was the only one with a gun. There were many rules in life, and most rules were made to be broken. But in the world of Jimmy Tyler, and make no mistake, everyone lived in the world of Jimmy Tyler, there was only one cardinal rule that mattered. You do not fuck with Jimmy's women. His wife, his mistress, his several girlfriends and flings he kept behind his wife's back, they were all off limits. And there was more than one way to cross that line, too. Whether you're banging them or just looking at them with a lusty gaze, you keep your damn hands and eyes to yourself when it comes to whatever tuna town Jimmy Tyler's parking his beef bus into. And the man in the trunk, a boy, really, maybe early 20s, had pushed things far beyond the golden rule. No, he'd had designs to take poor old Miraz away from the life, away from Jimmy Tyler's world. To put it quite simply, that shit doesn't fly. The boy hadn't been hard to track down either. Shit, he'd practically led Jimmy straight to him through the letters to his wife. Letters that detailed all the places he could be found and the times he'd usually be there. Jimmy had quizzed his wife about these places during their final fight. She'd insisted she'd never gone to see the boy, and that she only still had the letters because she'd forgotten to throw them away. She'd said that she never even considered cheating on Jimmy. But there was something wrong in her eyes, and that was enough to confirm all of his suspicions about her infidelity. He hit a pothole, and he cursed as his car bottomed out and jostled the trunk's contents. Couldn't have the good old boy smacking his head and going unconscious before the fun began. The syringe he'd plunged into his neck might have already numbed his senses, but hey, you can't make a kidnap murder omelet without cracking a few eggs. He just hoped the light he'd installed in the trunk hadn't turned off. His wife's corpse had taken forever to chop up and grind like beef, and he'd be damned if his captive didn't get to see and smell the trash bag stuffed with her remains. And the trash bag was just a temporary container for those remains. Just 2 more hours until Millinac, Florida, where his buddy Roger's boat was docked. Roger wouldn't mind Jimmy borrowing the boat for a good old late-night road trip. Normally, he'd be flooring it in his car, since speeding tickets didn't mean much when you're a demigod of wealth. But he restrained himself and kept the speedometer at 60, eyes on the prize. He had to piss. He pulled over to the next empty gas station. He straightened his tie, did a quick check in the rearview mirror, and then walked around back to pop the trunk. "Well," he said, studying his captive, "what do we have here now? Little Romeo boy all trussed up like a pig on a spit?" The younger man in the trunk looked up at him without recognition in his eyes. That was okay. The boy had never formally met Jimmy before sticking it to his wife. The entitled little bastard probably didn't even do his research on the man he was stealing from before getting wild ideas about running away from his property. What wasn't okay was the absence of any emotion whatsoever in the boy's expression. He didn't even look catatonic. He just looked bored, maybe? Jimmy didn't exactly have a flair for the dramatic or anything, but he'd hoped to see the fear of God in this punk's face the moment he popped the trunk. He forced a smug grin, though. The fear would come. Oh, God, yes, the fear would come. "Hi, I'm Jimmy Tyler," he said. "And you're the little fuck who's been sticking it to my wife, aren't you?" The kid shook his head. He said something from beneath the gag. "What's that?" Jimmy asked. "You're denying it, huh? You know what? I'm feeling generous. Let's hear what you cooked up in that noggin of yours over the last few hours. We've got plenty of time." He reached down and removed the gag from the boy's mouth. The kid was silent at first, maintaining eye contact with Jimmy as he straightened his jaw and licked his busted lip. "You need to let me go," the boy said calmly. "Right now. I never touched your wife, and that's the God's honest truth." Jimmy waited for more. He waited for the begging to come, for the desperation. But the boy was silent again. Jimmy scoffed. "You're not a very good liar, kid, but you've got balls for trying. Fact is, I intercepted one of those letters you've been sending to my wife. Dozens and dozens of those damn things, day after day. Credit where it's due, kid. You must be a first-timer at all this steal your wife business. I mean, haven't you heard of emails? Didn't you think you'd be caught sending this handwritten bullshit straight to my front door?" The boy remained silent, and that annoyed Jimmy. "Here's the gist of it," Jimmy said, bending forward and sticking a finger in the boy's face. "You aimed too high for your first time. You tried to steal my property, and now you're gonna fucking pay." Jimmy stared at the kid a moment longer, but the kid gave him nothing. That was okay. He had other ideas. He went to the back seat and grabbed the duffel bag buried beneath a pile of clothing, in case he was pulled over. This part wasn't supposed to happen until later, but he was getting too riled up to restrain himself. "I thought you might want to say hello to that slut wife of mine," he said, reaching into the bag. He withdrew his severed head, dangling it by the long black hair. His wife's lush red lips were open from her terminal scream, and her eyes looked fluttered as if she were mid-orgasm. He held the head closer to the boy's face. Finally, hallelujah, the kid gave visible reaction. He stared, dumbfounded. Jimmy even saw tears in his eyes. "Aw, you're a crier," Jimmy said, setting the head down next to the kid's face. She was too. "That's okay, don't you worry. I expect a lot of crying from you before the night's through. Do you want to know what I'm going to do to you, or would you rather I keep it a fun surprise?" The boy didn't respond. His mouth hung open as he stared at the backstabbing bitch's dead face. Jimmy pulled a hacksaw from the bag. It was still covered in blood and gristle from slicing through his wife's corpse. He'd taken her head last. She was still alive and screaming when he'd gone to work on her hands and feet. "Hell, I guess it ain't much of a surprise anyhow, so I'll just come out with it. You're gonna die, kid. Slowly. Painfully. Hell, you'll be in so much pain by the time I'm through with you, you'll be begging to suck my dick just for the sweet release of death. And that bag next to you? That's what's left of your lover, gal. You see, I loved that cheating bitch to the moon and back. I honest to God did, and she was one fuck of a good lay. But she betrayed me. You see where I'm at here? I loved her, but I had to kill her because she broke the rules. And she did it because of you, little man." The boy was openly weeping now, eyes locked with the corpses. Jimmy grinned in earnest, and almost gave him a hard-on watching the boy fall apart so miserably. "Here's what I'm going to do to you," he continued, "and I want you to really think about it for the rest of the drive, okay? I'm going to cut off your arms and legs first, right? And then I'm going to do it in small sections, like I'm serving up prime rib. And once you're nothing but a bleeding torso with a head, I'm going to take this," he drew a large funnel with a wide tube from the duffel bag, "and I'm going to stick it up your asshole. And then, handful by handful, I'm going to stuff my cheating wife up inside you the way you stuffed yourself up inside of her. You'll probably die of shock before all this, but I want you to know, alright? I want your last thought to be, I'm going to be used as shark bait, and I fucking deserve it. Dwell on that a bit, would you? The boy's crying became louder. He was openly sobbing with red-faced gusto. He sucked in sputtering breaths, and Jimmy listened with pleasure as he dropped the duffel bag into the trunk and went to take a leak beside the car. The cries grew louder and louder, however, and what started as entertaining grew quickly annoying. Knock that off, would you? Jimmy snapped, smacking the hood of the car. At least die like an honorable man. You've got this coming, all right? You fuck with Jimmy Tyler's things, this is what happens. I'm not crying for me, the boy said. His reddened face turned suddenly savage. I'm crying for you. This, admittedly, threw Jimmy for a loop. He stared at the kid blankly a moment, not sure where this was going. Is that your idea of a threat? He asked. Because, boy, you're in no position to. It was a test, the boy continued. We wanted to see if you could be changed. Whether or not you'd show mercy if you thought your wife was cheating, even if you had no proof. A test, huh? A test from who? The angels, the boy said. We had a bet, and I lost. Another tear rolled down his cheek as he rocked weakly in his binds. Jimmy was silent for a moment, flabbergasted. And then he threw his head back and laughed, applauding wildly. Christ, kid, you've got a real pair on you, you know that? He asked. Now that is the wildest, most imaginative Hail Mary play I've ever heard. Damn, where did you even come up with that, huh? Was that just off the top of your head? What else you got? I'm serious, the boy said. We've been watching you for a while now. All the vice, all the sin. But you haven't yet crossed any serious lines. You hadn't damned your soul for all eternity. Ah, Jimmy Tyler said. I think I get it now. Yep, you and your angel buddies decided to pull a fast one on me, is that it? You're saying you want me to find those letters that you wrote to my wife. Letters that spoke none too favorably of me. Letters that promised to run away with her and show her paradise? Yes. Jimmy laughed again. This was almost too much, even better than he'd hoped. Well, guess what, asshole? If that's all true, then she's dead because of you. What do you have to say about that? The boy looked at the severed head and at the bag of meat next to it. His haunted expression was almost beautiful. Almost angelic, Jimmy supposed. I'm sorry, the boy said. We were just some bored kids in heaven. We didn't expect it to go this far. It was just a game. Jimmy clapped his hands slowly, shaking his head. He stuck his fingers between his lips and whistled. Bravo, kid. That's some real award-worthy shit. Fuck, I almost want to let you go just on account of the sheer audacity. Some angels playing games, huh? Bravo. Do it, the kid pleaded. Let me go. Maybe my brothers will have mercy on you. I wasn't even supposed to come to Earth, and when they find out you have me, they'll tear you apart. Or, Jimmy said, maybe you can just flutter your wings and fly away. Come on, show me some of that neat angel shit. The boy shook his head sadly at the trunk floor. I never got my wings, he said. I thought maybe by changing a sinner I could earn them. Stupid of me. Jimmy sucked his throat in, leaned forward, and spit a wad of phlegm into the kid's face. You fucked my wife. That's the reality here, and don't you fucking forget it. Now be a good little angel, and think about that for the rest of our little road trip, would you? He slammed the trunk lid closed. He expected more sobbing, maybe some theatrical cries. All he got was silence. He laughed again as he walked back to the driver's seat and started the car. Some angel. He drove mostly in silence for the rest of the trip, periodically turning on the radio and blasting the volume to make sure his angel wouldn't fall asleep. Sleep would be a release. He wanted him to marinate in fear. As he drove, he thought about all the things he was going to do once he had the kid out in open water. Hell, he might even flay a pair of angel wings into his back, just for giggles. At last, he came to the outskirts of Millinack, where he could smell the ocean not far from the road he was on. Though palm trees obscured everything but the path before him, he knew the pier where Roger's boat was docked was only a few miles ahead. He could feel the boat awaiting his arrival the way a man could feel imminent destiny. He played the part of a man for far too long now. Tonight, he became a beast, a predator, an unfuckwithable god bestowing judgment on his transgressor. As if also sensing imminent destiny, the boy in the trunk began to shout. "Release me now!" he cried. "Release me before it's too late!" Jimmy heard him hammering at the trunk with both feet, and it was enough to make him squeal in delight. He'd finally broken his spirits. He'd be teetering on the edge of madness before the first blade even touched him. And then, collision. Jimmy barely saw the thing swoop down from the trees overhead, and it struck his windshield with such force that the glass shattered and the car spun toward the side of the road. He jerked the wheel madly, overcorrecting at first and sending the car into a tire-squealing 180. He shouted in surprise, adrenaline off the charts as the car finally stopped spinning and settled just off the side of the empty road. Something was on the roof. Heavy footsteps caused the car to stir afresh. As if by instinct, Jimmy's hand flew toward the gun in the glove compartment, and he fired 6 consecutive shots through the roof, heart jackhammering in his chest. The heavy footsteps continued unabated, shaking the car again. In the rearview mirror, Jimmy saw a pair of gargantuan legs settle on top of the trunk, and he felt the front of the car rise from the sheer weight of the strange figure. The stranger's calves were like those of a world-class powerlifter, all muscle and sinew, and something leathery was draped just above them. A cape? A coat? The thing on the trunk began bashing at the surface below, and Jimmy heard metal whining as it was twisted and pulled away. Thinking fast, he slammed his foot down on the gas pedal, and as the car shot forward, the figure on the trunk fell off onto the road behind him. When he hit the brakes again, he jerked forward against the seatbelt, and he put the car into park and hurried from the car, gun in hand. His immediate thought was this: the boy in the trunk wasn't as innocent as he seemed. No, he was a damn fine actor, all right, and also much more well-connected than Jimmy had assumed. He'd somehow known where Jimmy had intended to take him and what road he'd take to get there. And he had a team of special operatives waiting overhead in the trees, hence the figure now lying in the road. Well, the unlucky sons of bitches were about to learn something. He swept the gun overhead as he got out of the car, searching for more figures overhead. When he found none, he settled the gun back onto the figure in the road and fired 2 more shots. The top of the figure's bare scalp flew away in a red mist. He fired twice more in quick succession, missing the first time, but hitting the figure's naked shoulder the second shot. "Fuck with me, will you?" Jimmy fumed, firing once more and missing terribly. "You gonna fuck with me? Nobody fucks with Jimmy Tyler." He walked toward the back of the car and found the trunk completely mauled open. The boy's tearful eyes stared up at him. He looked beyond petrified. You could have just let me go," he told Jimmy quietly. Jimmy pointed the gun at him, but it had no effect on the boy's dazed expression. "We were just bored, that's all. Just a couple of bored kids. We never meant for any of this to happen." There was a loud groan from behind Jimmy. He spun around, gun pointed at the figure again. The figure stood up from the road, and in the faint moonlight, Jimmy could make out a look of mild annoyance in its broad, animalistic facial features. Its eyes were like twin caves without end, or any hint of light, just emptiness extending into eternity. When it opened its mouth to suck a deep breath that it couldn't take through its flattened and bat-like nose, Jimmy saw multiple rows of glistening fangs. At its full height, the broad-shouldered humanoid looked like 2 men stacked atop one another, easily the tallest and most imposing figure Jimmy had seen in his life. And when it spread its wings, it seemed to eclipse everything else around it, terminating Jimmy's view of the path ahead. Jimmy stood there, pissing himself now and watching in sheer awe. The gun slipped from his hand. The creature pointed a long and pale finger toward the trunk, and Jimmy wondered absently if perhaps he was being offered a choice. Let the boy go and we're square, all forgiven. But it wasn't a peace offering in the creature's twisted expression. It was accusation. Evidence before the sentencing. Jimmy shook his head. "Wake up, wake up, wake up," he told himself. but no such mercy was to come. I didn't know, he said helplessly. The boy in the trunk spoke up. I told you, he said. I told you to just let me go. I told you what my brothers would do if they found you. Jimmy held his hands up in surrender, which was a foreign feeling to someone like him. He actually felt tears running down his cheeks now. His mouth hung open, conjuring words that wouldn't come. Words had abandoned him, just as his delusions of the world and his place in it had also abandoned him. This was no longer Jimmy Tyler's world. The creature was upon him in 2 long strides, and then he was suddenly in the sky with wings whipping around him. And as he hung upside down, he could see the treetops below growing smaller and smaller. Soon they were above the ocean, and by that point, Jimmy was screaming not just in dread, but in pain that he never thought possible. His left arm hit the water first, followed by splashes of gore from his innards. Seconds later, one of his legs hit the water. And then, finally, the eviscerated husk that had been Jimmy Tyler splashed into the ocean, turning the water around him crimson. If he were alive moments later, enough to see the angel swooping down overhead to make sure its work had been completed, he would have also seen that his prophecy of earlier in the night had come true. A shark did indeed come after the gory meat bag it had been offered, and it devoured Jimmy Tyler in short measure. The end.